The little red light on the camera is a patient, unblinking eye. My granddaughter, Clara, gives me a small, encouraging smile from behind the lens, her brow furrowed with the concentration of someone trying to be both professional and gentle. It's her project, she'd explained. A living history, a way to capture the stories before they fade. My story. I'd agreed, for reasons I am still untangling myself. A cup of chamomile tea, its steam coiling into the quiet air of my living room, sits untouched on the table beside my armchair. My hands, mapped with the rivers of age, rest in my lap. My gaze, however, isn't on Clara or her camera. It's fixed on the mantelpiece, on a single silver frame. Inside it, a moment from another lifetime is frozen in the warm, honeyed tones of an old photograph. Most people look at a photo like this and see happiness. Youth frozen in a perfect, sun-drenched moment. 5 teenagers sprawled on a picnic blanket by the deep, cool waters of Havenwood Lake, the Oregon pines standing as dark, silent witnesses behind them. People see friends, they see camaraderie, they see Liam. But I don't see a friend. I see a master architect of ruin, my ruin. And I don't cry because of the pain he caused me. I cry because it took me so long to realize the most terrifying truth. The monster wasn't a stranger in the dark. The monster had the key to my house, slept on my couch when his parents were fighting, and called me his best friend. Clara thinks this is a story about survival, and it is, but it's not the story she's expecting. To understand the house you live in, you must first understand its foundation, down to the last grain of sand and the first hint of rot. And that photograph? That is the blueprint of it all. The colors have softened with time, the vibrant greens of that long-ago summer mellowing into sage, the brilliant blue of the sky fading to a gentle periwinkle. There are 5 of us, a perfect, self-contained universe. On the far edge of the blanket is Sarah. Even in the faded image, you can see the sweetness in her face, a timid smile playing on her lips. Her head is tilted, her hair falling over one shoulder, and she's looking at the camera as if she's slightly startled to be included. She was the gentle one, the conscience of our group, a role that proved too heavy for her to bear when the time came. I look at her image now with a quiet sort of pity, for the girl she was and the woman she was too afraid to become. Next to her, propped up on one elbow, is Mark. He isn't smiling. He has a look of detached coolness, a cigarette held loosely between his fingers. A prop, really, to make him look more like the brooding rebels in the movies we all loved. His eyes aren't on the camera either. They're on Liam. They were always on Liam. Mark was a follower, a mirror who reflected whatever our group's gravitational center wanted to see. He saw the red flags, I know he did. I saw them flicker in his eyes on more than one occasion, but looking away was easier. Staying quiet was safer. His silence was not empty. It was a choice, a brick laid in the wall that would eventually close in around me. And there, draped possessively around Liam's shoulders, is Chloe. Her chin is high, her lipstick a perfect, defiant slash of coral, even in the muted color palette. Her hair is immaculate, teased into a flawless blonde bubble. She isn't looking at the camera, she's looking at Liam, but her gaze is aimed like a weapon at anyone else who might dare to. She was the queen bee, her throne secured by her proximity to the king. Her cruelty was a shield for her own brittle insecurity, and I was the perfect surface on which to sharpen its edge. In the photograph, her hand rests on Liam's chest, her fingers spread, a gesture of ownership so clear it might as well be a brand. Then there's me, young Emma. I'm sitting with my knees drawn up to my chest, a book lying open but forgotten in the grass beside me. I'm not looking at the camera either. I'm looking at Liam, but my expression isn't proprietary like Chloe's. It's a soft, unguarded look of pure adoration. There's a shyness to my posture, a sense of being perpetually curled in on myself. I see that girl, with her simple dress and her naive, trusting eyes, and I feel a pang of sorrow so deep it's a physical ache. She believed in the goodness of people. She believed in the sanctity of their little group. She believed, most of all, in him. What a fragile, foolish thing she was. And finally, at the very center of the image, the sun around which we all orbited, is Liam O'Malley. He's leaning back, his hands clasped behind his head, the picture of effortless, charismatic ease. The summer sun catches the gold in his hair and makes his tan skin glow. And his smile. Oh, that smile. It was his greatest gift and his most devastating weapon. It was a wide, brilliant, captivating thing that reached his eyes and made you feel, for a moment, like you were the only person in the world. He was the star quarterback, the charming boy next door, the one who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket and into a girl's heart with equal, lazy grace. But the woman I am now sees what the girl in the photo could not. I can see the geometry of it. I can zoom in, past the faded colors and the cracked emulsion, and I can see the truth of that smile. It doesn't quite connect with his eyes. There's a vacancy there, a chilling hollowness that masqueraded as depth. It's not a smile of genuine happiness. It's a performance. It's a mask, expertly crafted and perfectly worn. It's a beautiful, well-rehearsed lie. That smile was a promise of safety, but it was the lock on a cage I didn't even know I was in. Our world then was Havenwood, Oregon. From here, so many years later, I can see it for what it was. A small, claustrophobic town nestled in a valley, smelling perpetually of damp pine and the sharp tang of the lumber mill that kept most of the families fed. It was picturesque, with its single main street, its quaint diner with the cracked vinyl booths, and its town square where we all gathered for parades and festivals. But beneath that postcard perfection, it was a place of rigid social codes and whispered judgments. Reputation was currency, and secrets were a disease. Everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least they thought they did. For a teenager, it felt like the entire universe, and to be cast out from the center of it was a fate worse than death. It was the perfect terrarium for a personality like Liam's to flourish, small enough for him to dominate, but closed off enough that no outside light could get in to expose the rot. "Grandma?" Clara's voice is soft, pulling me from the depths of the lake and the scent of the pines. "Are you okay to start?" I turn my head, my eyes meeting hers. I see the love there, the genuine concern. She sees her grandmother, a quiet woman who survived a tragedy long ago. She has no idea of the calculation, the cold fury, the decades-long game of chess that brought our family to this peaceful living room. She thinks this is a story of a broken heart. "I'm fine, my dear," I say, and my voice is steady. "I'm more than fine." I am telling this story for her, so she understands that the strength she has in her bones was forged in a fire she never had to witness. And I am telling it for myself. To take the narrative that was stolen from me and own it, every last ugly, terrifying, and triumphant word. To finally turn the ghost that has haunted my quiet moments into nothing more than a character in a story that I control. A story whose ending he never saw coming. To understand the ruin, you must first appreciate the cathedral that was built to hide it. You have to see the five of us, not as a collection of individuals, but as a system. A system designed to protect, elevate, and enable its king. And our king was magnificent. He was magnificent. To a girl like me, in a town like Havenwood, a boy like Liam wasn't just a person. He was a landmark. He was the Friday night lights burning bright over the football field, the echo of cheers in the crisp autumn air, the sun glinting off the chrome of his Ford Mustang. He was everything our town valued, confidence that bordered on arrogance, effortless athletic grace, and a lineage that was woven into the very fabric of the community. The O'Malleys owned one of the biggest logging operations in the county. They were practically royalty, and Liam was the undisputed crown prince. His magnificence wasn't just in his looks or his charm, but in the way he moved through our world as if he had built it himself. In a way, for us, he had. Our life revolved around the worn-down vinyl booths of the Havenwood Diner. It was our court, and from the corner booth, Liam held sway. I remember countless afternoons spent there, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and sizzling burgers. Flo, a woman whose tired eyes had seen 3 generations of Havenwood kids grow up, would approach our table with a weary sigh, but her face would crack into a genuine smile the moment Liam looked up. "Flo, my queen," he'd say, flashing that brilliant smile. "You're looking radiant today. Did you do something with your hair?" She'd blush and swat at him with her order pad, but she'd pour his Coke first and make sure his fries were the crispiest of the batch. He knew her husband's name, asked about her son who was serving overseas. He made her feel seen, just as he made us all feel seen. We, his entourage, basked in that reflected glow. When you were with Liam, you were somebody. The extra slice of cherry pie Flo would slide onto our table, on the house, was just a small tax on the privilege of his company. His power was most visible under the stadium lights. Football was religion in Havenwood, and Liam was its high priest. I can still feel the thrum of the bleachers under my feet, the roar of the crowd, a physical force. I never understood the game, not really. I went for the atmosphere, for the feeling of belonging to something. But mostly, I went for him. After one particularly brutal victory against our rivals from Stone Creek, we were all waiting for him by the locker room doors. He emerged, his hair still damp, a slight limp in his gait, and the crowd of students parted for him like the Red Sea. A lanky, arrogant player from the other team, his face smeared with mud and defeat, jostled past me, deliberately knocking my books from my arms. "Watch it, bookworm," he sneered. Before I could even register the insult, Liam was there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just moved, placing himself between me and the other boy, his arm resting lightly on my shoulder. The gesture was casual, but it was a wall. "She didn't see you," Liam said, his voice a low, pleasant hum that did nothing to mask the ice beneath it. "It's understandable." It's hard to see much of anything from the ground after spending all night there. The Stone Creek player's face went from pale to crimson. A few people around us snickered. He mumbled something and scrambled away, utterly humiliated without a single punch being thrown. Liam then bent down, gathered my books, and handed them to me with a soft smile. "You okay, Em?" In that moment, a wave of warmth and gratitude washed over me so powerful it almost brought me to tears. I felt cherished. I felt safe. What I understand now, what the girl in the photo could not, is that I wasn't being protected. I was being marked. That casual arm across my shoulders wasn't a shield. It was a leash, a public declaration that I was part of his territory. He wasn't defending my honor. He was defending his property from being touched by an outsider. The invisible fences he built around me were subtle, constructed with jokes and feigned concern. During our junior year, a boy named David, a quiet, kind trumpet player from the school band, asked me to the fall formal. He did it in the crowded hallway between classes, his face flushed, his words tumbling over each other. For a dizzying second, I was flattered and terrified. It was a glimpse of a world outside our 5-person fishbowl. But the glimpse was all I got. Liam, who had been leaning against the lockers nearby with Chloe, sauntered over. He slung an arm around my neck, pulling me into a friendly headlock. "Whoa there, David," he said with a laugh, his voice booming in the hallway. "Trying to poach our girl? I don't know, man." "She's kind of our good luck charm. The group would fall apart without her. It's a heavy responsibility." David's face fell. He looked from Liam's grinning face to Chloe's condescending smirk, and then to my own confused expression. The implication was clear. I was not available. I was a shared commodity. David stammered an apology and vanished into the river of students. Liam released me, ruffling my hair. "Can you believe that guy's nerve?" he said, as if he'd just done me a massive favor. Chloe snickered. "As if you'd ever go out with a band geek, Emma." I felt a strange mixture of disappointment and relief. The relief was the most shameful part. Relief that I didn't have to make a choice, that I could retreat back into the comfortable, suffocating safety of the group. He did the same with my interests. My love for reading was a constant source of his affectionate ridicule. I'd be lost in a book, and he'd pluck it from my hands. "What boring thing has got you this time, Em?" he'd ask, reading the back cover with theatrical disinterest. One afternoon, at the lake, I was reading a collection of poetry. He snatched it, jumped onto a large rock, and began declaiming the lines in a booming, ridiculous voice. "My soul is a silent, waiting ship," he bellowed, clutching his heart. Chloe, Mark, and Sarah howled with laughter. I felt my face burn, the sting of humiliation sharp and hot. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. After he'd milked the moment for all it was worth, he hopped down and handed the book back to me, his smile softening just enough. "Hey," he said, nudging my shoulder. "Only I get to tease you. It's in the best friend contract. And there it was, that phrase. The contract. It was a joke, but it was also the truth. The unspoken terms were that I would be his quiet confidant, his intellectual foil, the steady, unassuming girl against whom his own brilliance could shine all the brighter. In return, I was granted a place at the center of the universe. I was protected, included, and in his own twisted way, prized. The price of admission was small pieces of myself, the boy I might have danced with, the book club I thought about joining, the opinions I learned to keep quiet. Chloe was the enforcer, her sharp tongue ready to mock any deviation. Mark and Sarah were the silent parliament, their inaction a form of consent. It was a perfect system, and I didn't see the bars for the simple reason that they were gilded with affection. I didn't feel like a possession. I felt chosen, and for a lonely girl in a small town, that feeling was worth almost any price. That feeling of being chosen, of being special, was worth almost any price. For years, the cost seemed negligible. A book I didn't join, a boy I didn't dance with, an opinion I swallowed like a bitter pill. They were small sacrifices laid at the altar of our friendship, and I made them willingly. Senior year, however, the world began to hum with a new frequency. The future, once a distant, hazy concept, was now a destination with road signs and deadlines. For the first time, I began to imagine a life outside the borders of Havenwood, a life I could chart on my own. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. It took the form of a crisp, heavy envelope tucked away in my dresser drawer beneath a pile of sweaters. It was my secret, my treasure. A letter of acceptance to Portland State University. It felt like a golden ticket, not just to a college, but to a version of myself I hadn't yet been allowed to meet. The night the world cracked was warm for late spring. Kevin Peterson's parents were out of town, which was the only invitation Havenwood's teenage population ever needed. His house, a sprawling ranch-style home at the edge of town, was pulsating with music and bodies. The air was thick with cheap beer and possibility. Our group held court in the backyard, near a flickering bonfire that sent sparks dancing into the dark, pine-scented sky. I felt the letter in my pocket, its sharp corners pressing against my leg, a private, thrilling secret. I watched my friends, caught in the firelight, Chloe laughing, a sharp, metallic sound. Mark trying to look serious while discussing football with some other jocks. Sarah humming along to the song on the radio. And Liam, at the center of it all, telling some grand story, his hands moving as he spoke, captivating his audience as always. For a few hours, I was content to just be there, on the cusp of my own life, the secret knowledge making me feel powerful. As the party thinned and the night deepened, our core group was all that remained, scattered on the grass around the dying embers. The mood was mellow, intimate. This, I thought, was the moment. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of nerves and excitement. "I have something to tell you guys," I announced. My voice was a little too loud in the sudden quiet. 4 faces turned toward me. "I got a letter today," I continued, pulling the envelope from my pocket. My hands were trembling slightly as I held it out. "I got into Portland State. I'm going to major in English literature." For a split second, there was the reaction I'd hoped for. Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with genuine delight. "Oh, Emma, that's amazing!" Mark gave me a nod of approval. "Wow, PSU? That's a real school." Even Chloe offered a flicker of something that might have been impressed surprise before her mask of cool indifference slipped back into place, but none of their reactions mattered. I was watching Liam. He was smiling. But it was the wrong smile. It wasn't his brilliant, sunny, town-charming smile. This one was tight, fixed. It didn't reach his eyes. As I watched, it wasn't that the smile vanished. It was that it receded, like a tide going out, leaving behind a hard, barren shoreline. The bonfire seemed to shrink, the warmth in the air leaching away. He didn't move a muscle, but the entire atmosphere around him shifted. It became cold, still, and heavy. He got quiet. The boisterous, laughing king was gone, replaced by a silent, watchful stranger. The silence stretched, amplified by the chirping of crickets in the long grass. He tilted his head, studying me as if I were a puzzle he couldn't solve, or perhaps one he had just solved and didn't like the answer to. "Portland," he finally said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. It was more chilling than if he had screamed. "You're going to Portland?" I nodded, the excitement in my chest deflating like a punctured lung. I thought it would be a good place for literature." He let out a short, sharp huff of air that wasn't a laugh. "A good place," he repeated, as if the words themselves tasted foul. Portland isn't Havenwood. It's a real city. It's dirty. People aren't nice there. They won't get you. You wouldn't last a week." His words were small, cold stones, each one hitting me with a dull thud. This wasn't concern. This was a verdict. "I think I could handle it," I said, my voice now a weak defensive whisper. "Could you?" His eyes, which I had always thought of as warm and kind, were now like chips of ice. "What would you even do? Sit in a library all day while the rest of the world moves on? We were all going to go to community college here for a couple of years. We were going to stay together." "I thought that was the plan." "There was no plan," I protested, my stomach churning. "We never made a plan." "Didn't we?" He leaned forward, the firelight casting sharp, menacing shadows across his face. I can't believe you'd do this." "That you'd make a decision that affects all of us without even talking to me. To us." He gestured to the others who were now staring at their feet, wishing they could disappear. He was making my personal achievement into a collective betrayal. He was making me the enemy. The final blow came softly, a dagger wrapped in velvet. He looked at me, and for a moment he let a flicker of manufactured hurt appear in his eyes. "You'd really leave me, Em?" And there it was. The world tilted on its axis. My dream, my golden ticket, my secret, soaring hope. He had taken it and twisted it into an act of personal abandonment. I was no longer an ambitious student. I was a disloyal friend. I was the one hurting him. A hot, sick wave of guilt washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. How could I have been so selfish? How could I have not considered his feelings, the group's feelings? He saw the victory in my eyes. He stood up, brushing the grass from his jeans. "It's late," he said to the group at large, his voice returning to normal, as if the last 5 minutes of cold psychological warfare had never happened. He walked over to me and pulled me into a hug. It was not a comforting embrace. It felt like a cage, his arms strong and unyielding around me, pinning me in place. He whispered in my ear, his voice a proprietary murmur, "Don't worry. We'll figure it out. I'll help you." He wasn't offering help. He was asserting control. As I watched him walk away into the darkness, with Chloe trailing faithfully behind him, I stood there shivering in the warm night air. The joy from my letter was gone, replaced by a deep, confusing misery. It was the first time his adoration had felt like a threat. It was the first time I'd seen the possessive darkness coiled beneath the charismatic charm. That night wasn't just a fight. It was the first unseen crack in the foundation of my world, a quiet, terrifying fissure through which, for the very first time, I felt the cold draft of the truth. That cold draft of truth didn't just fade with the morning sun. It lingered, a persistent chill that followed me through the school hallways, into the classrooms, and settled deep in my bones. The crack from that night on Kevin Peterson's lawn didn't heal over. It began to spiderweb, silently and invisibly, through the very foundation of my life. A few days later, I tried to fix it. I cornered Liam by his locker, my heart pounding with a nervous resolve. I thought if I could just talk to him, away from the others, I could make him understand. "Liam, can we talk about the other night?" I began, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "About Portland." "I feel like things have been weird ever since." He shut his locker door and leaned against it, folding his arms. He looked down at me, and his expression wasn't cold like it had been that night. It was worse. It was one of mild, patronizing amusement. "Weird? Em, what are you talking about? Nothing's weird." "It is," I insisted. "You were angry. You made me feel awful for wanting to go." He actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Angry? God, you're being so sensitive. I wasn't angry. I was surprised, that's all. My best friend makes this huge life decision, and I'm the last to know. Of course I was a little thrown, but I want you to be happy. You know that. He reached out and tugged a strand of my hair, his old familiar gesture of affection. You're overthinking this. You've been in a weird mood lately. You need to relax. And just like that, the reality of what happened was rewritten. My valid feelings were dismissed as being too sensitive. His cold, manipulative anger was reframed as simple surprise. The problem wasn't his behavior, it was my reaction to it. I walked away from that locker feeling dizzy, my own memory feeling suddenly unreliable, like a poorly tuned radio drifting in and out of static. That was the last time I tried to reason with the king. I didn't know it then, but he had already outsourced the rest of the campaign to his most faithful disciple. The next day, Chloe found me by the library. She glided up to me, her face a perfect mask of cloying counterfeit concern. "Emma, honey, are you all right?" she asked, her voice dripping with sympathy that felt oily and false. "It's just... Liam is so worried about you." I stiffened. "Worried? Why would he be worried?" "Well," she sighed, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "he just says you haven't been yourself, ever since you got that letter. He feels like you're pulling away, getting defensive about everything. He's really hurt, you know. He just wants his best friend back." The artistry of it was breathtaking. In 2 sentences, she had cemented the new narrative. I was the unstable one. I was the one pulling away. I was the one hurting him. My ambition wasn't the issue. My new, difficult personality was. It was the first sermon in what would become the gospel according to Chloe, and she preached it with the fervent zeal of a new convert. The social cuts began almost immediately. They were small at first, paper cuts of exclusion. I'd come to school on Monday and hear them all laughing about a movie they'd seen at the drive-in on Saturday night. When I asked why no one had called me, Chloe would wave a dismissive hand. "Oh, it was totally a last-minute thing. Mark's dad let him borrow the truck and we just went." You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. I had sat by the phone all Saturday night waiting for it to ring, a sick feeling of dread coiling in my stomach. A week later, I overheard Mark talking about a trip to Cannon Beach for the weekend. "What trip?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Chloe stepped in before he could answer, placing a placating hand on my arm. "Emma, we were going to ask you honestly. But Liam said you seemed really stressed with finals coming up and probably needed a quiet weekend to yourself to study. He was just trying to be thoughtful." Her smile was beatific. She was offering me a reason that was impossible to argue with without sounding ungrateful or paranoid. They weren't excluding me. They were caring for me. They were giving me the space I so clearly needed. My protests died in my throat. How could I argue? How could I say, "No, I'm not stressed. I'm just lonely, and I think you're all abandoning me"? I would sound exactly as crazy and sensitive as they were painting me to be. Mark and Sarah were her silent congregation. If I managed to ask them a question when Chloe wasn't around, they would refuse to meet my eyes. Mark would mumble something about how he thought Liam was going to call, and quickly find a reason to be somewhere else. Sarah, at least, had the decency to look pained. I would catch her watching me with a look of deep sorrow, but if I met her gaze, she would flinch and look away. Her pity was a useless balm, offering no warmth and no help. Her silence was just another form of agreement. I began to feel like I was losing my mind. The world I had known, a world with a solid, predictable shape, had become a funhouse of distorting mirrors. Was I overreacting? Had I imagined the coldness in Liam's eyes? Were they really just trying to be considerate? I replayed conversations over and over in my head, searching for clues, for proof that my own feelings were valid. The more I searched, the more I doubted myself. I became quiet, withdrawn, watchful. I was so terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing, of proving their narrative correct, that I barely spoke at all. Of course, my silence was then taken as further proof of my weird mood. It was a perfect, inescapable trap. I was being edited out of my own life, and the worst part was, they had managed to make me feel like I was holding the eraser. The gospel spread. I felt it in the way other students would look at me in the hallways, their glances a mixture of pity and curiosity. The story had taken root. Emma, the quiet, smart girl, was having some kind of breakdown. She was becoming difficult, moody, pushing away the very friends who loved her so much. Chloe was the master propagandist, delivering her daily updates with a heavy sigh and a sad shake of her head. And Liam remained above it all, the benevolent, long-suffering king, forced to watch his troubled friend lose her way. They didn't need to build a wall to keep me out. They simply created a quiet, creeping fog of lies and half-truths, a fog so thick that I could no longer see the path. They isolated me so completely that I began to isolate myself, just to stop the pain of trying. I was a ghost at their table, a phantom in the halls, profoundly and terrifyingly alone in a crowd of people who had once been my whole world. They had unmoored me from reality, and I was drifting, lost in a sea of doubt, becoming the exact vulnerable, broken thing they needed me to be. The fog of doubt they had so carefully crafted around me was my new reality. I breathed it in every day, and it poisoned everything. My own thoughts felt foreign, my feelings unreliable. I had drifted so far from the shoreline of myself that I no longer trusted my own navigation. This state of profound vulnerability, this utter isolation, I see now that it wasn't the end goal. It was merely the preparation of the battlefield. The final conquest was yet to come. It happened on Founder's Day. It was the centerpiece of Havenwood's summer, a town-wide picnic and festival in the main park. The entire community would be there. In a last, desperate act of hope, a foolish attempt to prove to myself that things weren't as bad as they seemed, I decided to go. I put on a simple sundress, brushed my hair, and walked to the park, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety. The scene was exactly as it always was. Families on checkered blankets, the smoky perfume of barbecue hanging in the air, the distant sound of the high school band practicing for the parade. I saw them immediately, our group, occupying their usual prime spot under the big oak tree near the gazebo. I took a deep breath and walked toward them, pasting a fragile smile on my face. As I approached, their laughter and conversation didn't so much stop as it paused. It was a subtle, collective intake of breath. Liam glanced up at me, his expression unreadable, before turning back to whatever Mark was saying. Sarah gave me a weak, fleeting smile before becoming intensely interested in a loose thread on her blanket. It was Chloe who spoke, her voice bright and brittle. "Emma? Hi." It was the polite, dismissive tone one uses for a distant acquaintance, not a friend. There was no invitation to sit, no space made for me on the blanket. The message was as clear as if it had been written on a banner above their heads. "You are not welcome here." I stood there for a humiliating moment, a satellite knocked from its orbit, before mumbling something about looking for my parents and retreating. I didn't look for my parents. I fled. I walked away from the music and the laughter, my face burning with a shame so hot it felt like a fever. I found myself wandering toward the deserted baseball field behind the park, the sounds of the festival fading behind me. I climbed the old, splintered wooden bleachers, the ones that overlooked the empty, sun-drenched diamond, and I sat down on the highest bench. And there, alone, with the whole town celebrating just out of sight, I finally let myself break. The tears I had been swallowing for weeks came in silent, racking sobs, a complete and total surrender to the despair I could no longer fight. I was at the absolute bottom of the pit they had dug for me. I don't know how long I sat there before a shadow fell over me. "There you are," a voice said. Liam. He was standing at the bottom of the bleachers, looking up at me, his face a perfect picture of gentle concern. "We were looking for you. I saw you walk off." My breath hitched. A stupid, treacherous spark of hope ignited in my chest. He came for me. He does care. He climbed the bleachers and sat down beside me, leaving a careful foot of space between us. "Hey," he said softly. "What's going on, Em? Why are you hiding out here?" "You know why," I whispered, wiping at my tears with the back of my hand. "You all hate me." "No one hates you," he sighed, and he sounded so tired, so genuinely sad. He moved closer, and the warmth from his body felt like a hearth fire. "God, I hate seeing you like this. I miss my best friend. Everything's just gotten so complicated." He put his arm around my shoulder, and I leaned into him, my exhausted body craving the comfort, the familiar scent of his jacket, the feeling of his strength. I was so broken, so hungry for a single scrap of the affection I had lost, that I didn't recognize the nature of the trap until it had already sprung. His arm tightened around me. The gentle comfort became a grip. I tried to pull back slightly, a flicker of unease finally penetrating my grief, but his hold was like iron. "Liam," I started to say, my voice faltering. "Shh," he murmured, his voice changing, losing its warmth, becoming flat and cold. "It's okay. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make things simple again." His other hand came up, tilting my chin, so I had to look at him. The mask was gone. Utterly. The charming king, the concerned friend, all of it had evaporated. I was looking into the eyes of a complete stranger, someone chillingly calm and purposeful. And I was terrified. What followed was not an act of passion or uncontrollable rage. It was a quiet, methodical dismantling of what was left of me. It was an act of administration, a reassertion of ownership. He pushed me back against the hard, splintered wood of the bleachers, his weight pinning me down, and as he violated my body, my mind detached. I floated somewhere above, watching the scene from a great distance. I focused on the peeling gray paint of the wood next to my head, the single, perfect V-shape of a bird flying high against the blue sky, the tinny, distorted sound of a Sousa march from the festival, drifting on the breeze. I felt the cold metal of his watch press into my wrist. These details were my only anchors in a world that had suddenly dissolved into incomprehensible horror. He didn't speak much, but the words he did say were burned into my memory, the true purpose of this final, horrific act. "This is your place, Emma," he whispered, his voice calm, instructive. "Right here. This is what you're for. You just forgot for a little while. I'm just reminding you." When he was done, he simply stood up, adjusted his clothes, and looked down at me. The broken girl crumpled on the bleachers. There was no remorse in his eyes, no emotion at all. It was the detached look of someone who had just completed a necessary but unpleasant task, like putting down a sick animal. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me shattered in the afternoon sun. I lay there for an eternity, the world silent save for the ringing in my ears. I felt fundamentally changed, as if a fault line had just split my entire existence into a before and an after. The girl who had climbed those bleachers weeping with social shame was gone forever. In her place was a silent, hollowed-out thing. My body felt like a house that had been burglarized, its contents smashed, its sense of safety obliterated. That day was the beginning of a new, unspoken contract. The abuse did not stop there. It became a horrific, intermittent secret between us, a new power he held over me. He had absolute control now, reinforced by the silent, looming threat of what he'd done and what he could do again. My silence was no longer a choice or a result of confusion. It was a prison, locked from the outside by his actions, and from the inside by a shame and a terror too profound for words. He hadn't just put me in my place, he had annihilated me. Annihilation is a quiet process. It doesn't happen with a bang, but with a slow, systematic hollowing out, until all that's left is a fragile shell. I became that shell. The weeks that followed that day on the bleachers were a gray, featureless blur of terror. My life, which had once been filled with books and laughter and the mundane dramas of youth, now had only one texture: fear. It was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of everything. I moved through the school hallways like a ghost. I sat in class and heard nothing. The ongoing, intermittent horror of Liam's reminders became the new, unspoken contract of my existence. He had absolute power, and my silence was the cage that held me captive. But a body can only hold so much silence. A soul can only endure so much terror before it has to scream. The scream doesn't have to be loud, and it isn't always rational. It is simply a primal, biological imperative. My scream came one Tuesday afternoon after gym class. He had grabbed my arm the day before, his fingers digging in as he whispered a threat about an upcoming test I dared to mention studying for with a lab partner. Now, a cluster of ugly purple-brown bruises bloomed on my bicep, a secret map of his ownership. Staring at it in the locker room mirror, something inside me finally snapped. I saw Chloe across the room, laughing with some other girls, and a desperate, insane idea took root. She's a girl. She would have to understand. She loves him. She wouldn't let him be this person. It was the last dying ember of a belief that some fundamental decency had to exist, even in her. It was a fool's hope, but it was the only hope I had left. I waited until she was alone, toweling her hair dry by her locker. I approached her, my reflection in the mirror behind her, looking like a pale, haunted stranger. "Chloe," I began, my voice a ragged whisper. The bruises on my arm felt like they were burning. She turned, an impatient look on her face. "What, Emma?" The words tumbled out, broken shards of my reality. "It's Liam," I choked out, tears already welling in my eyes. He's hurting me." "You have to believe me. I couldn't say the words, but I pulled up the sleeve of my t-shirt, revealing the ugly marks on my arm. "He does things. She stared at the bruises, her face blank for a long moment. I held my breath, praying for a flicker of horror, of sympathy, of anything other than the coldness I had grown to expect. I saw her mind working, connecting the dots not of my pain, but of her own narrative. Then her expression shifted. Her lips, which had been a neutral line, slowly, cruelly, curled into a smirk, and then she laughed. It wasn't a giggle. It was a harsh, ugly bark of a laugh, sharp and full of contempt. It echoed off the tiled walls of the locker room, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Emma," she said, her voice dripping with a venomous pity that was far worse than her anger. "Is this what you've been reduced to? This is pathetic, even for you." "It's true," I sobbed, my last shred of hope crumbling. "No," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. "What's true is that you are a sad, obsessed little liar. You couldn't stand that he chose me, so you've been trying everything to get his attention. And when acting crazy didn't work, you decided to invent this disgusting story." She gestured at my arm. "You probably walked into a door for that. You are a homewrecker, Emma. A pathetic, desperate homewrecker. And you will not take him from me." She had taken my shattered truth and reforged it into a spear, which she now plunged directly into my heart. She saw my trauma not as a crime committed by him, but as a failed tactic in a war for his affection. She didn't just disbelieve me, she recontextualized my violation as a pathetic strategic move. Chloe did not keep my confession a secret. It was too valuable a weapon. She took my broken, tearful plea and polished it into a new, sensational chapter of her gospel. The story that spread through the school the next day was no longer just about moody, difficult Emma. It was about Emma, the liar. Emma, the stalker. Emma, so dangerously obsessed with Liam O'Malley that she was now accusing him of heinous things to try to break him and Chloe up. The new narrative was shocking, dramatic, and compelling. It painted me as the villain, and Liam as the tragic hero, the golden boy being tormented by a deranged ex-friend. The final abandonment was swift and total. The next day, I saw Mark in the hallway. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flash of panic on his face before he physically turned, his back to me, and pretended to be engrossed in a notice on the bulletin board until I had passed. He didn't just ignore me, he actively fled. His cowardly indifference had finally curdled into active condemnation. The final nail was Sarah. I saw her by the bus loop after school, and in a last futile gesture, I went to her. This was Sarah, sweet Sarah, who had at least looked at me with pity. "Sarah, please," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "You can't believe her. You know me." She took a step back, pulling her books tighter to her chest as if I were contagious. The pity in her eyes was gone. It had been replaced by fear and worse, by disgust. "Emma," she said, her voice shaking, I think you need help. You should talk to someone." "What you're saying about Liam, it's sick." She turned and practically ran toward her bus, leaving me standing alone on the pavement. That was the moment I understood. I was utterly and completely alone. It wasn't just that no one believed me. It was that they had all chosen to believe a story that cast me as a monster. My last hope for human solidarity, for the simple validation of my own reality, had been extinguished. I was the accused, tried, and convicted in the court of Havenwood High, and my sentence was a silence more profound and absolute than any I had ever imagined. The world hadn't just abandoned me, it had condemned me, and in doing so, had walled me up alive inside my own silent scream. The wall of silence built around me was absolute. I lived inside it, breathing its stale, airless quiet. The days became a sequence of mechanical movements. Get out of bed, go to school, endure the averted eyes and the whispers that fell silent as I approached. Go home, lie in bed. I was a machine made of grief, going through the motions of a life that was no longer mine. The world had lost its color, its texture, its taste. But while my spirit had been hollowed out, my body began a secret, terrible rebellion of its own. It started as a subtle betrayal, a wave of nausea in the morning that I would dismiss as stress, an exhaustion so profound it felt like my bones were filled with lead, which I attributed to the weight of my misery. My own body was becoming a stranger to me, an unreliable vessel I no longer understood. I told myself it was psychosomatic, that the horror I was living through was simply manifesting in physical ways. It was easier to believe my mind was breaking my body than to consider the alternative. The denial held for a few weeks, a flimsy shield against a creeping, terrifying possibility. Then one morning in chemistry class, the acidic smell of a routine experiment sent me lurching from my stool. I barely made it to the girls' bathroom before I was violently sick. As I knelt on the cold, tiled floor, my cheek pressed against the cool porcelain of the toilet, I could no longer ignore the truth. The symptoms weren't just in my head. My body was keeping a secret that had been planted there in violence on a sunny afternoon on a set of splintered bleachers. The walk to the town's only pharmacy felt like a mile-long walk of shame. I kept my head down, my hoodie pulled up, praying I wouldn't see anyone I knew. The box felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket as I paid the cashier, my hands trembling so badly I could barely count the change. At home, I locked the bathroom door, the click of the lock sounding like the first turn of a key in a prison cell. The world shrank to the small, white plastic stick in my hand, the instructions I read 3 times without comprehension, and the agonizing 2-minute wait that stretched into an eternity. I didn't cry when I saw them. I didn't scream. A strange cold calm washed over me, the kind of profound stillness that follows a catastrophic explosion. 2 pink lines. They weren't the soft, hopeful pink of a sunrise. They were a stark, brutal, clinical pink. They were the bars of a cage. They were a life sentence. My dream of Portland, of a library filled with books and a life of my own choosing, didn't just fade. It evaporated in an instant. This thing inside me was an anchor, a chain that bound me not just to Havenwood, but to him. It was a living, growing manifestation of his crime, a parasite stealing a future that was no longer mine to claim. My body, the last sanctuary I thought I possessed, had become the scene of the crime, and now it was a prison, nurturing the evidence. Despair is too small a word for what I felt. It was an obliteration. I don't know what propelled me to find him. It wasn't a search for help or a plea for support. It was a numb, horrified compulsion, a need to make this unreal nightmare tangible by speaking it aloud to its architect. I found him after school, in his usual spot in the student parking lot, leaning against the hood of his Mustang. "Liam," I said. My voice was a dead, flat thing. He looked up, a flicker of annoyance on his face at being addressed by the town pariah. "I need to talk to you." I led him to the far end of the parking lot, where the woods began, a place where no one could overhear. I stood before him, the shell of a girl, and delivered the verdict. "I'm pregnant." I watched his face, expecting anything. Anger, disgust, panic, denial. I was prepared for him to yell, to call me a liar again, to threaten me. I was not prepared for what I saw. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. An eerie, unnatural calm settled over his features. The muscles in his jaw didn't tighten. His eyes didn't widen. He just looked at me, his expression placid, as if I had just commented on the weather. and then I saw it. It was tiny, a micro-expression so fleeting that if I hadn't been studying his face with the hyper-vigilance of a trauma victim, I would have missed it. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of something crossed his face. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was triumph, a deep, quiet, chilling satisfaction. It was the look of a gambler who had just drawn the winning card, the look of an architect seeing his meticulous blueprint finally take shape. The look made no sense, and that's what terrified me more than any rage could have. It was a look that belonged to a different story, a story whose plot I couldn't begin to fathom. He let the calm mask slide back into place. Publicly, I knew, he would deny it was his. He would feed the narrative of the obsessed liar. But here, in the secrecy of the trees, he gave me his real response. He stepped closer, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. The smile of a predator that knows its prey is irrevocably trapped. "Good," he said, his voice a soft, final murmur. "Now you'll never leave." The words landed with the heavy, metallic clang of a prison door slamming shut and the key turning in the lock. I was trapped, not just by the judgment of a town or the betrayal of my friends, but by my own biology. And my jailer, for some monstrous, incomprehensible reason, was pleased with his work. I was no longer just a victim. I was an incubator for a secret I didn't understand, a living piece in a game whose rules I would not learn for a very long time. His final words, "Now you'll never leave," became the soundtrack to my life. They were the first thought that greeted me in the morning, a venomous whisper accompanying the wave of nausea that was now my constant companion. They echoed in the silent, condemning stares at school. They were the last thing I heard at night before falling into a restless, dream-haunted sleep. I was a walking tomb, carrying both my own death and a new life that felt like a curse. His triumph was a mystery that gnawed at me, a madness I couldn't comprehend, and it was somehow more terrifying than the abuse itself. The walls were closing in, and the air was getting thin. One night I reached my breaking point. I couldn't face another day of the averted eyes, of Chloe's triumphant smirks, of Liam watching me with that cold, proprietary satisfaction. I couldn't face another morning of being sick with the evidence of his crime. There was only one thought left in my exhausted mind. Run. It wasn't a plan. It was a primal instinct, the flight response of a cornered animal. I waited until the house was dark and silent, then pulled a small duffel bag from the back of my closet. I packed a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the meager $74 I had saved from birthdays and babysitting, stashed in an old jewelry box. It was a pathetic arsenal for starting a new life, but it was all I had. I was going to walk out the front door and just keep walking until I was somewhere else, anywhere else. As I zipped the bag, a thought struck me. My grandmother Eleanor, my mother's mother, had passed away a few months earlier. She was a quiet, almost reclusive woman who smelled of lavender and old books. Most of her simple belongings had been given away, but my mother had kept a few boxes of her more personal effects, storing them in my closet with the vague intention of sorting through them later. My grandmother had been a child of the Great Depression. She didn't trust banks. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, she had tucked some emergency cash away. Driven by a desperate, grubby need, I pulled one of the dusty cardboard boxes into the center of my room. The box contained what I expected: neatly folded linens, a few chipped teacups wrapped in newspaper, a small photo album. But underneath it all was something else, something that felt utterly out of place with my grandmother's Spartan existence. It was a heavy, ornate wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, made of a dark, polished wood I didn't recognize. The fittings were brass, tarnished green with age, and a small, intricate lock, for which there was no key, adorned the front. It was heavy, not just with physical weight, but with the palpable presence of secrets. Prying the lock open with a nail file from my dresser, the wood gave way with a sad, splintering groan. The first thing I saw inside was a lock of baby hair tied with a faded blue ribbon. Beneath it lay a few yellowed photographs of people I didn't know, a delicate pressed flower that crumbled to dust at my touch, and a simple silver locket. It was a memory box. My brief hope for cash vanished, replaced by a pang of melancholic disappointment. I started to close the lid, but then my fingers brushed against a thick bundle of papers at the bottom, tied with a brittle silk ribbon. Curiosity, an emotion I hadn't felt in months, stirred within me. I untied the ribbon, its fibers disintegrating between my fingers. The documents were thick, official-looking. An old birth certificate for a woman named Eleanor Hawthorne, my grandmother. A deed for a property in a place called Gearhart, Oregon, dated decades ago. It was all history, relics of a life I knew so little about. And then I found the letters. There was a thick stack of them, perhaps a dozen or more, all on heavy, cream-colored paper. At the top of each page, an address was embossed in elegant, raised lettering. Finch Associates, attorneys at law. Portland, Oregon. Portland, the name of my dead dream. It was a punch to the gut. I almost put them away. The pain of the reminder was so sharp. But I didn't. I opened the first letter, dated from a time before I was even born. The language was dense, full of impenetrable legal jargon. I scanned it, my eyes catching on phrases that meant nothing to me. Fiduciary responsibility. Administration of assets. In accordance with the codicil. It was boring, confusing. I moved to the next letter, dated a few years later. And there it was. A phrase capitalized that stood out from the rest of the dense text. The Hawthorne Trust. I stopped, my breath caught in my chest. I shuffled through the rest of the letters. It was there in every single one, regarding the quarterly statements of the Hawthorne Trust. Management of timber holdings within the Hawthorne Trust. The terms of the primary beneficiary of the Hawthorne Trust. It was a long, formal, and clearly significant correspondence between my quiet, unassuming grandmother and a powerful law firm, all centered on this mysterious entity. I sat there on the floor of my bedroom, the contents of the box spread around me like an archaeological find. My own small, shabby bag, packed for a hopeless escape, sat forgotten in the corner. The $74 seemed like a child's fantasy. The plan to run away into the night dissolved, replaced by a single burning question that eclipsed everything else. What was the Hawthorne Trust? I didn't have hope, not the way I had before. The world was still a dark and terrifying place, but for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I had something other than my own fear to occupy my mind. I had a thread. A name. A destination. I was still a prisoner, but I had just found a strange, ornate key, and I had to know what door it unlocked. For the first time in months, I had a reason to face the next day, not just endure it. I had to get to Portland. I had to find Finch Associates. The $74 in the duffel bag lay forgotten on my bedroom floor. In their place, I clutched the bundle of letters from Finch Associates. They were a tangible link to a world beyond Havenwood, a mystery that hummed with a strange, terrifying energy. The desperate animal instinct to simply run had been replaced by something sharper, a purpose. I had to know what the Hawthorne Trust was. I had to know what secrets my quiet grandmother had kept. The next morning, I didn't walk out the front door and keep walking. I walked to the bus station and bought a one-way ticket to Portland. The bus ride was a 4-hour journey through a landscape of rolling green hills and endless pine forests. With every mile that separated me from Havenwood, I felt a layer of suffocating dread peel away, only to be replaced by a new, sharp-edged anxiety. I was a pregnant, traumatized teenager with less than $50 to my name, heading into a city I didn't know, to chase a ghost from a box of old letters. It was insane. But the image of Liam's triumphant smile was burned into my mind, a riddle that demanded an answer. Any risk felt less terrifying than the madness of not knowing. Portland was a shock to the system. The noise, the towering buildings, the sheer number of anonymous faces. It was everything Havenwood was not. I felt small and insignificant, a stray leaf swept up in a current. Following the address from the letterhead, I found myself in the city's old financial district, standing before a building made of dark granite and marble. A polished brass plaque next to the heavy oak doors read, "The Willamette Building." It spoke of old money and quiet, unshakable power. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of floor wax and old paper. The law office of Finch Associates was on the 4th floor. The receptionist, a woman with severe-looking glasses and hair pulled into a tight bun, looked me up and down with unconcealed disapproval. I was a disheveled, visibly distressed teenager, and I clearly did not belong in her world of hushed tones and tailored suits. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice clipped. "I'd like to see Mr. Finch," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but Mr. Finch does not see anyone without an appointment." She was already turning away, dismissing me. Panic seized me. I couldn't have come all this way for nothing. I leaned forward, placing the bundle of letters on her pristine desk. "Please," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Tell him it's about the Hawthorne Trust. Tell him Eleanor Hawthorne's granddaughter is here." The name worked like a magic word. The receptionist's disdain flickered into confusion, then caution. She picked up her phone, spoke in a low murmur, and a moment later, a door behind her opened. The man who emerged was elderly, perhaps in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that were a pale, intelligent blue. He was tall and stooped slightly, but he moved with a quiet authority. This had to be Alistair Finch. He looked from the letters on the desk to my face, his expression unreadable but intensely focused. "Miss?" he said, his voice a dry, gentle rasp. "I'm Emma James," I said. "My grandmother was Eleanor Hawthorne." He nodded slowly, a deep, ancient understanding dawning in his eyes. "Please," he said, gesturing toward his office. "Come in." His office was like a sanctuary from another time. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, the air smelled of pipe tobacco and dust, and a large window looked out over the bustling city below. He closed the heavy door, shutting out the world, and gestured for me to sit in a worn, comfortable leather armchair. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk and steepled his fingers, studying me for a long, silent moment. "You have your grandmother's eyes," he finally said. "I knew her for over 50 years, a fine, quiet woman who carried a heavy burden." He paused. "What can I do for you, Emma?" I told him everything. The box, the letters, the mysterious name. I left out the part about Liam, about the abuse, about the pregnancy. I just presented him with the puzzle I couldn't solve. He listened patiently, his gaze never leaving my face. When I was finished, he let out a long, slow sigh. "I wondered if this day would ever come," he said. "The story of the Hawthorne Trust is your story, Emma, your birthright, and your curse." And then he told me. He told me about my great-grandfather, a timber baron who had amassed a colossal fortune in the early days of the state. He had built an empire of lumber, shipping, and property. But his wealth was shadowed by a tragedy. A rare genetic marker, passed down exclusively through the Hawthorne women, caused a host of devastating health problems, almost always leading to an early death. My great-grandmother, my grandmother's older sister, my own mother, all of them had been frail, sick, and gone too soon. "Your great-grandfather was a brilliant man, but he was a man of his time, Mr. Finch explained. He was desperate to see his legacy survive, to see it pass into strong hands, so he created the trust with a very specific, very secret clause." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "The entirety of the Hawthorne estate, the companies, the lands, the investments, a fortune of staggering size, is locked. It can only be fully accessed and controlled by a single individual, a healthy, male heir born to the last surviving female of the Hawthorne bloodline." The room tilted. My breath caught in my throat. "The last one?" I whispered. Mr. Finch nodded grimly. "That's you, Emma. You are the last one." I was reeling, trying to process the impossible scale of what he was saying, but he wasn't finished. "For 50 years, he said, his voice dropping lower, "this firm has been fielding quiet, discreet inquiries about the trust, probing its defenses, looking for loopholes, trying to get a valuation. It's always been the same family, a family with its own ambitions in the timber industry, a family that knew the Hawthorne legend and, we suspect, knew about the secret clause in the trust." He hesitated, as if reluctant to deliver the final killing blow. "What family?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mr. Finch looked at me with an expression of profound sorrow. "A family from your town, I'm afraid," he said softly. "The O'Malleys." The name hit me with the force of a physical impact. O'Malley. Liam O'Malley, In that single horrific instant, the entire universe snapped into a new and terrible alignment. It wasn't madness. It was a plan. His sabotage of my college plans to keep me in Havenwood under his control. The isolation campaign to make me vulnerable, dependent on him alone. The abuse, the violation. It wasn't about passion or anger. It was a means to an end. It was insemination. And his smile, that flicker of unnatural, triumphant satisfaction when I told him I was pregnant, it was the look of a businessman closing a deal. Of a prospector striking gold, of a thief who had just successfully cracked the most complicated safe in the world. I wasn't a person to him. I was a vessel, a vehicle. I was the last Hawthorne female, the carrier of the golden ticket. And the child inside me, the living symbol of my violation, was not a curse to him. It was the prize. A fire started deep in the frozen landscape of my heart. The despair, the confusion, the shame I had carried for months, it was all burned away in a flash of pure, clarifying rage. I was no longer a confused girl, a victim of senseless cruelty. I was the target of a cold, calculated, generational conspiracy. And I was sitting on the key to the kingdom they were trying to steal. The name O'Malley hung in the air of that quiet, wood-paneled office, a poison gas that clarified everything. I didn't shatter. I didn't weep. The part of me that was capable of that kind of soft, emotional collapse had already been burned away. Instead, a terrifying crystalline calm settled over me. All the chaotic, painful pieces of my recent life, which had been swirling in a vortex of confusion and shame, suddenly slammed into place with the force of a tectonic shift. It was a mosaic of pure, calculated evil, and now I could see the whole picture. Mr. Finch watched me, his pale blue eyes filled with a sad, ancient wisdom. I think he expected me to break. He expected the tears of a violated, frightened girl. But the girl who had walked into his office was gone. I looked at him, my gaze steady, and the fire that had ignited in my heart didn't burn with heat. It was a cold fire, one that didn't consume, but forged. My first question was not, what do I do? It was, can they touch it? The trust. Can Liam or his family access any part of it now? A flicker of surprise, then respect, crossed Mr. Finch's face. He saw the shift. No, he said, his voice firm. Not directly. The terms are ironclad. The trust is sealed until the conditions of the air clause are met. Their interest has always been in a corporate sense. Acquisitions, mergers. They want to absorb the Hawthorne assets into their own empire, and they have been waiting, like vultures, for the Hawthorne line to die out so the trust would be dissolved and its assets sold off. But a male heir changes that, I stated. It wasn't a question. A male heir, he confirmed, assumes absolute control of the entire trust upon his 18th birthday. He becomes one of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest overnight. In that moment, everything about my own body changed. I looked down at myself, at the slight swell of my stomach that I had viewed with such horror. It was no longer a tumor, a parasite, a symbol of my undoing. A fierce, primal possessiveness so powerful it made me dizzy surged through me. This was not Liam O'Malley's child. This was my child. He was a Hawthorne. He was the only thing in the world that mattered. The man who had planted the seed was nothing more than a biological donor, a thief who had tried to steal a kingdom and had unknowingly handed its key to the one person who could lock him out forever. My child was not my shame. He was my purpose. He was the weapon that had been placed in my hands. He can never know, I said, my voice low and hard as stone. Liam, his family. They can never know this baby exists, not until it's too late. Mr. Finch nodded slowly, a deep alliance forming between us in the quiet of that office. He was not just a lawyer, he was the guardian of a legacy, and he had just found its new protector. I agree, he said. Your grandmother, Eleanor, lived in fear of the O'Malley's ambition her entire life. It's why she was so reclusive. We must ensure her great-grandson does not suffer the same fate. The conversation shifted. It was no longer a history lesson. It was a strategy session. I was no longer a client receiving information. I was a commander being briefed. My chaotic, desperate plan to run away with $74 was a child's fantasy. The plan we began to build that afternoon was a meticulous legal and financial act of war. "You must disappear," Mr. Finch stated. "Not just run away, you must cease to exist. At least Emma James of Havenwood must." He laid out the resources at his disposal. The firm could create a new identity for me, backed by the legal framework to make it airtight. They would handle the paperwork, the birth certificate, the social security number. We chose a new name for me, a shield for the woman I would have to become. I chose Eleanor, for my grandmother, the quiet woman who had guarded this secret her whole life, and Vance, a name I plucked from a book on his shelf for no other reason than it sounded strong, impenetrable, Eleanor Vance. Next, a location. It had to be far from Oregon, far from anyone who might recognize me, a quiet, anonymous town where a young single mother wouldn't attract undue attention. We settled on a small university town in Colorado, a place with good doctors and a transient population of students that would allow me to blend in. "And money?" I asked, the practical reality of it all dawning on me. "The trust has provisions, Mr. Finch explained. "For the maintenance and security of the bloodline, I can access a discretionary fund. It's not the fortune itself, but it will be more than enough. You will have a comfortable apartment, healthcare, whatever you need to live quietly and safely. Your only job, Miss Vance," he said, using my new name for the first time, "is to have a healthy baby and raise him to be a good man. The rest, we will handle." My birth plan was no longer a nightmare of being trapped under the watchful eye of my abuser. It was a covert operation. My pregnancy was no longer a public shame, but a state secret. My goal was no longer to simply survive the next 24 hours. It was to win a war that would culminate in 18 years. It was a long, patient, and utterly ruthless game, and I was finally learning the rules. When I walked out of the Willamette building and back onto the bustling streets of Portland, I was not the same person who had entered. The terrified, broken girl from Havenwood was gone, left behind in that leather chair like a shed skin. In her place was Eleanor Vance, a woman with a powerful ally, a secret fortune, a strategic plan, and a core of diamond-hard fury. I was no longer running from Liam O'Malley. I was moving my first piece in a war he didn't even know had begun. The war plan, as Mr. Finch and I had called it, was executed with the swift, silent precision of a military operation. I returned to Havenwood for less than 24 hours, a ghost in my own home. I wrote my parents a short, vague, and heartbreakingly cruel letter. It spoke of needing to find my own way, of an opportunity I couldn't pass up, and asked them not to look for me. Every word was a lie, and every lie felt like a necessary cruelty, a layer of misdirection to protect them from a truth they could never comprehend, and to ensure my disappearance was absolute. The next morning, before the sun was up, I was on a bus heading east, leaving Emma James and the wreckage of her life behind forever. In her place sat Eleanor Vance, a quiet, pregnant young woman with a core of secrets and steel. My new life began in a small, sunlit apartment in a quiet university town in Colorado. The mountains stood guard on the horizon, silent and eternal, a welcome contrast to the claustrophobic pines of Havenwood. Here, I was anonymous. I was free. The first few months were a strange cocoon of solitude and purpose. Mr. Finch's office provided for everything. There was money in my new bank account, the apartment was furnished, and my prenatal care was with the best doctor in town. My only job was to be healthy, to be calm, and to wait. The day my son was born was not a day of trauma, it was a day of triumph. In the sterile quiet of that anonymous hospital room, I held him for the first time, and the last vestiges of my fear were burned away by a love so fierce it was a physical force. He was perfect, he was healthy, he was mine. He was a Hawthorne. I looked into his tiny, scrunched-up face, and I saw not the shadow of his father, but the dawn of a new legacy. I named him Nathaniel, a strong, classic name. And on the official birth certificate, under the cold fluorescent lights, I listed his name as Nathaniel Hawthorne Vance. He was claimed, he was protected. The first move of the long game was complete. For the next 18 years, our life was an exercise in quiet, loving obscurity. Our small apartment was filled not with fear, but with books and music and the sound of Nathaniel's laughter. I read to him every night from Dr. Seuss to The Hobbit, nurturing his mind and his imagination. I taught him kindness, empathy, and the quiet strength of integrity. I was a devoted, wonderful mother because my entire existence was dedicated to a single mission: to forge this boy, my son, into a man who was everything his father was not. He was my secret weapon, and I polished and honed him with love, not pressure. Telling him the truth was a slow, careful process, a story unfolded over many years. It began as a bedtime story, the legend of his brave Hawthorne ancestors, pioneers who built an empire but were haunted by a secret sadness. As he grew, the story became more complex. I told him about the trust, framing it not as a fortune to be won, but as a great responsibility, a legacy he was born to protect. The final, hardest truths came during his teenage years. We would take long walks in the foothills of the Rockies, and I would tell him, piece by piece, the story of my life in Havenwood. I told him about a charming boy named Liam O'Malley and the web of control he wove. I explained the genetic curse of the Hawthorne women, and finally, with a steady voice and a heart that no longer ached with the shame of it, I told him the clinical, monstrous truth of his conception. I did not frame it as a story of my victimhood. I framed it as the story of his survival and of the enemy who had tried and failed to steal his birthright. He didn't flinch. He didn't recoil in horror. He listened, his young face hardening with a quiet inherited resolve. He was not scarred by his origins, he was armed by them. His loyalty was not to a name or a fortune, but to me, his mother, the woman who had built a fortress of love around him. All the while, Mr. Finch was my eyes and ears. Every few months, a discreet, typewritten letter would arrive from Portland. They were my echoes from another world. I saw in the Oregonian that Liam O'Malley and Chloe Miller were married at the Havenwood Country Club. It was, by all accounts, the social event of the year. Another, years later. The O'Malley Corporation continues to expand. They are powerful, respected, pillars of the community. And the most important updates. My discreet inquiries confirm they remain childless. I would read these letters and feel a cold, grim satisfaction. Let them have their parties, their reputation, their hollow empire. Let them be the king and queen of that small town. They were childless. The one thing Liam's entire monstrous plan had been for, an heir he could control, was the one thing his life lacked. I, in my quiet, anonymous exile, had the true prize. I had the heir. Back in Havenwood, I became a ghost. A cautionary tale. Poor Emma James. I could almost hear the whispers. So smart, but so troubled. Ran off one day and was never heard from again. Probably met a sad end. My disappearance became a local legend, a tragedy that reinforced their belief in their own safe, predictable world. It was the perfect camouflage. No one looks for a ghost. The 18 years passed like a single, long breath held in anticipation. We moved from the small apartment to a comfortable house. Nathaniel grew into a tall, kind, and fiercely intelligent young man, with my eyes and a strength that was all his own. On the eve of his 18th birthday, we sat together in our living room, the original Hawthorne documents spread out on the table between us. He was no longer a boy being told a story. He was my partner, my co-conspirator. He understood the stakes. He was ready. I looked at my son, the product of so much pain, forged into so much good. The long game was over. The weapon was complete. The king was on the board. Tomorrow, I said, my voice steady and clear, they're going to hear from a ghost. Nathaniel's 18th birthday dawned clear and cold. There were no balloons, no cake, no boisterous party. Our celebration was a quiet one, marked by a solemnity that felt more like the eve of a coronation than a birthday. We sat at our dining room table, the official notarized documents declaring his legal adulthood stacked neatly beside his plate. At precisely 9 a.m. our time, the phone rang. It was Mr. Finch. "Good morning, Eleanor, and happy birthday, Nathaniel." His voice was as crisp and dry as old parchment. "Everything is in motion. The server has his instructions. The initial filings have been submitted to the courts. The board has been notified. Thank you, Alistair.
I said, my voice calm. For everything. It has been the honor of my life to serve the Hawthorne legacy, he replied. The Queen is on the board. Good luck. He hung up. Nathaniel looked at me, his expression serious, his eyes holding the same steely resolve I felt in my own heart. It's time, he said. I simply nodded. 18 years. 6,570 days of waiting, of planning, of raising my son in the quiet shadows for this exact moment. Miles away, in another world, the King of Havenwood was in his castle. I could picture it perfectly. Liam and Chloe O'Malley would be in the sun-drenched breakfast nook of their sprawling, custom-built home overlooking the lake. They would be drinking expensive coffee, surrounded by the trappings of a life they had built on my destruction. I knew from Mr. Finch's reports that Liam was now the head of his family's corporation, a position of immense power in our small corner of the world. He was respected, admired, a pillar of the community. He was also, I knew, in the final stages of a hostile bid to acquire a smaller, independent timber company and its substantial land holdings, a company that had, for 70 years, belonged to the Hawthorne Trust. Their morning peace, the comfortable rhythm of their unexamined lives, was shattered at approximately 10:15 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It came in the form of a knock on their grand double front doors. Chloe would have answered, annoyed at the intrusion. On her doorstep stood a man who did not belong in her world, a tall, impassive stranger in a severe suit, holding a thick, cream-colored legal envelope. A process server. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Liam, annoyed, would take the envelope, assuming it was a nuisance lawsuit from a disgruntled contractor. He would tear it open with casual arrogance. He would see the familiar, expensive letterhead of Finch Associates, and a flicker of something would stir in him. A memory of a name from long ago. And then he would read. I had memorized the key paragraphs, the words Mr. Finch and I had crafted with the precision of surgeons. This letter serves as formal notification, as per the binding articles of the Hawthorne Trust, established 1948, that the primary heir has now reached legal majority. Control of all assets, holdings, and fiduciary responsibilities of said trust is hereby and henceforth transferred to the sole beneficiary, Mr. Nathaniel Hawthorne, and his legal guardian and primary trustee, Ms. Emma James. The name. My name, Emma James. The ghost, stepping out of a forgotten grave and onto the letterhead of his ruin. I imagined the blood draining from his face, the confident smirk dissolving into slack-jawed disbelief. Chloe would demand to know what was wrong, and he would be unable to speak, his world suddenly tilting off its axis. But it would get worse. He would continue to read, his eyes scanning the list of assets now under my control. Hawthorne Timberlands, tens of thousands of acres he thought were fallow. Hawthorne Financial Holdings, a portfolio he couldn't have imagined. And the final item on the list, the North Fork Lumber Company, the very company O'Malley Corp was trying to acquire, now owned lock, stock, and barrel by the ghost of the girl he thought he had destroyed. His hostile takeover had just been taken over. And then, the final, elegant, devastating checkmate. The line we had perfected, a legal statement of fact with the force of a nuclear bomb. It was buried in a section about the formal verification of the heir, as per the long-standing security protocols of the estate, and for the legal protection of the bloodline, a full paternal genetic confirmation for the heir, Mr. Nathaniel Hawthorne, was conducted upon his birth and has been held under seal with the estate records. The results of this test are, of course, a matter of permanent, confidential record. It was not an accusation. It was a statement. It didn't mention abuse. It didn't mention rape. It simply, calmly, and irrevocably confirmed his paternity. It made his public position, that the crazy, obsessed Emma James had run off after lying about a pregnancy, an instantly provable falsehood. It was a dagger, wrapped in legal jargon, aimed directly at the heart of the life he had built on that lie. I pictured the scene with cold, satisfying clarity. The thick, expensive paper fluttering from his numb fingers. Chloe snatching it, her face twisting from confusion to rage as she saw my name, and then to pure animal fear as she comprehended the financial and social annihilation contained in those paragraphs. Their power, their reputation, their future,
All of it had been built on the O'Malley name and fortune. And I, the ghost they had created, now controlled the assets they had schemed for 2 generations to acquire. The summons wasn't an invitation to a legal battle, it was a notification of an execution. For 18 years, Liam O'Malley had slept soundly, believing he had won. He had buried his secrets, buried his victim, and built a kingdom on her grave. He never realized that all that time I wasn't haunting him. I was quietly, patiently, and meticulously planning the complete and total hostile takeover of his entire life. The war was already over. He had just received the articles of his unconditional surrender. The fallout from the summons was, as Mr. Finch later described it, catastrophic. The O'Malley Corporation's stocks plummeted as news of the shift in control over key timber assets became known. Their lenders grew nervous. Their carefully constructed empire, built on a foundation of lies, began to tremble. For 2 weeks, there was a flurry of frantic, desperate legal maneuvers from their side, all of which were calmly and efficiently dismantled by Mr. Finch's firm. The war was over, and all that was left was the mopping up. Then came the call I had been waiting for. It was Mr. Finch. "Eleanor," he said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "We have received a formal request from Mr. Liam O'Malley. He is petitioning for a meeting." "With you." "Is he?" I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "He is desperate. He has waived all rights to have his counsel present." "He just wants to talk to you. The choice, of course, is entirely yours." This was his final, pathetic gambit. Not a legal move, but a personal one. An appeal, a surrender. "I'll meet him," I said. "On my terms, a neutral location, next week." We chose a private meeting room in an old, quiet hotel in Portland, a place of hushed elegance where his wealth meant nothing and his rage would have no audience. Nathaniel and I arrived first. He was no longer a boy, but a tall, self-possessed young man, his calm demeanor a mirror of my own. He wore a simple, dark sweater, and his presence beside me was not that of a prop or a prize, but of a partner. We were a united front. We were the Hawthornes. Liam arrived exactly on time. The man who walked through the door was a ghost of a different kind. The golden boy of Havenwood was gone. This man was in his late 30s, but looked a decade older. His expensive suit hung on a frame that had lost its arrogant posture. There were deep lines of stress around his eyes, and his hair was threaded with gray. The easy, captivating smile was gone, replaced by a tight, haggard desperation. He looked at me, and then his eyes shifted to Nathaniel. In that gaze, I saw the entirety of his life's failure. He saw the son he was meant to control, standing tall and strong and completely, utterly alien to him. He began, his voice hoarse. The old nickname felt obscene in his mouth. "Thank you for seeing me." We remained silent, waiting. He wrung his hands, a gesture of weakness I had never seen from him before. "Look, I know things are a mess. The businesses, the money, we can sort that out. That's not why I'm here." He took a hesitant step forward. "I'm here for him, my son. I want to know him. I have a right to know him." His plea, his pathetic appeal to a right he had forfeited with violence and deceit, hung in the silent room. I did not raise my voice. I did not show the cold fire of rage that had fueled me for 18 years. I simply looked at him, my expression placid, and began to dismantle him piece by piece. "A right?" I said, my voice quiet, conversational. "Let's talk about rights, Liam. Let's talk about my right to go to college, which you systematically destroyed because you couldn't risk me leaving your sphere of influence. Let's talk about my right to have friends, a right you and Chloe revoked by painting me as unstable. Let's talk about the Hawthorne Trust." His face went pale. "You knew, didn't you?" I continued, my voice never rising. "Your family has known for generations." "You knew about the heir clause. You knew I was the last of the line. This was never about friendship or love or any human emotion. It was a long con, a business plan. You targeted me, isolated me, broke me down, and when I was at my most vulnerable, you didn't just hurt me, Liam. You made a strategic deposit, hoping to sire an heir you could control, to steal a fortune you had no claim to.
He stared at me, speechless, his mouth slightly agape. The king had been dethroned, and now his conqueror was calmly reading him the list of his crimes. "You asked to know your son," I said, gesturing to Nathaniel, who stood beside me, his expression unyielding. "Nathaniel knows everything. He knows about the trust. He knows about the O'Malley family's ambitions. And he knows, in full, clinical detail, the circumstances of his conception." I made sure he was armed with the truth, not burdened by it. For the first time, Nathaniel spoke. His voice was deep, steady, and utterly devoid of the emotion Liam was so desperately trying to provoke. "My mother," he said, looking directly at Liam, "is all the family I have ever needed." That single, calm statement was a more brutal rejection than any scream of hatred could have ever been. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting, the end of the game. "So, no, Liam," I said, my voice cool and final. "You will not have a relationship with my son. You will not see him. You will not speak to him. This isn't a punishment. It's a consequence. A man capable of such monstrous, calculated cruelty is a threat. And threats to my son are neutralized. The ultimate justice here isn't watching your company crumble. It's ensuring that your entire monstrous plan resulted in you getting absolutely nothing. You have no power here. You have no heir. You have no history with us." I looked at this broken man, this hollowed-out king. His final, pathetic gambit to appeal to a shared humanity had been declined. There was nothing left to say. Nathaniel and I turned and walked toward the door, our steps in unison. We didn't look back. We left him standing alone in the center of that quiet, elegant room, a man who had tried to steal a kingdom and was now left with no crown, no heir, and no power at all. He was, finally and completely, a ghost in his own life. We left him there, a statue of a man in a silent room, the ghost of a king whose kingdom had just vanished in the telling of a single, buried truth. The walk back to our car was quiet. Nathaniel put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity, not of comfort, because he knew I didn't need comforting. I needed nothing from that past anymore. It was over. The aftermath was not a storm, but a quiet, irreversible tide change. We took control of the Hawthorne assets with the swift efficiency of Mr. Finch's firm. The North Fork Lumber Company was folded into our portfolio, its acquisition by the O'Malleys permanently blocked. We restructured, we reinvested, we built. We did not set out to destroy what was left of the O'Malley Corporation. We simply removed ourselves from their orbit, taking with us the assets they had coveted for so long. Their company survived, humbled and diminished. Liam and Chloe faded from the state's financial pages and retreated into the quiet obscurity of Havenwood, their grand ambitions reduced to small-town concerns. Their punishment was not a fiery ruin, but the quiet, lifelong knowledge of what they had lost and what they had failed to steal. Our work was not about revenge. It was about reclamation. With the vast resources of the Hawthorne Trust, Nathaniel and I established scholarships for underprivileged students in Oregon who wanted to study the arts and humanities, the very future that had been denied to me. We created environmental conservancies to protect the old-growth forests my great-grandfather had once sought only to conquer. We turned a legacy of patriarchal ambition and secret tragedy into a force for good, for growth, for life. Nathaniel, my brilliant, kind son, found his own path. He fell in love with a wonderful woman, an architect who designed beautiful, light-filled spaces. They married, and they gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren. They gave me a family, built not on secrets and lies, but on a foundation of honesty, respect, and a love so profound it healed parts of me I didn't know were still broken. The sound of a soft sniffle pulls me from the depths of memory. I am back in my armchair, the afternoon sun slanting through the window. The little red light on the camera is off. My granddaughter, Clara, is sitting on the ottoman opposite me, her face streaked with silent tears. She looks at me, her eyes filled with the enormity of the story she has just heard. I reach out and take her hand, my old, wrinkled skin covering her smooth, youthful one. I offer her a gentle, genuine smile, a smile free from all the ghosts of the past. "It's all right, my dear," I say softly. "The story has a happy ending." Her gaze drifts to the mantelpiece, to that single faded photograph that started this whole conversation. The 5 teenagers by the lake, frozen in their perfect sun-drenched lie. That photograph, I say, my voice clear and steady as I follow her gaze. That is a story about a foundation of lies. It's the blueprint of a ruin. Then I turn my head, gesturing with a slight nod to the rest of the room. The walls, the bookshelves, the end tables, they are all filled with other photographs, dozens of them, all in bright, living color. Nathaniel and his wife on their wedding day, his face split by a smile of pure joy. My grandchildren covered in birthday cake, their faces alight with glee. All of us on a beach vacation, the ocean spray on our faces. A recent photo of Nathaniel, now a man in his 40s, looking at me with such love and respect, it makes my heart ache with pride. These, I say, my voice softening as I look at the vibrant gallery of my real life. This is the house I built on top of it. Clara looks from the lonely, toxic photo on the mantel to the thriving, happy world that surrounds it, and a slow, beautiful understanding dawns in her tear-filled eyes. She finally sees the whole story, not just the darkness of its beginning, but the brilliance of its end. I lean back in my chair, the warmth of the sun on my face. The long-held secrets are finally free, their power dissolved in the telling. Liam O'Malley tried to write my story for me. He tried to cast me as a victim, a casualty, a tragic ghost in the history of his ambition. But he failed. He didn't create a victim, I say, my final words for my granddaughter, for the camera, for myself. He created an ancestor. And in the quiet of the sunlit room, surrounded by the evidence of a life not just survived, but won, I take a sip of my now cool tea. The silence that fills the space is no longer heavy with things unsaid. It is a peaceful silence, full and complete. It is the sound of home.